So here's a little overview of what we're going to get into today. We'll start with talking about what's new for 2022. Then we'll move into capital project grant overview, speak about organization eligibility, project eligibility, financial eligibility, assessment and scoring, spending the grant, applying for the grant, and then resources, and then we'll have a Q&A period at the end. So I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you today from Victoria on the unceded Coast Salish territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, known today as the Esquimalt and the Songhees First Nations. I know people are calling in from all across BC today, and so I'd invite you to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional territory where you're currently viewing this presentation from today. So unquestionably, the biggest factor over the last year has been COVID-19, and BC's not-for-profit sector has very quickly responded, and because of this, they've been able to continue providing essential services to British Columbians, including many vulnerable people who are particularly affected by the outbreak. In response to what we heard last year, we adapted the capital project policies to allow applications for projects needed due to the COVID pandemic, pandemic-related projects specifically. As capital projects are often many years in the making, and recognizing the impact financial situation of many organizations, the minimum matching funds contribution for the program was reduced from 50% to 20% for projects or acquisitions that are specifically to meet the needs of COVID-related projects. For 2022, COVID-19 related projects will continue to be supported to help organizations responding to the ongoing impacts of the pandemic, recognizing that many organizations now have implemented the necessary changes to the delivery of their programs or services. Capital project applications for both regular or COVID-related projects will be assessed on equal consideration. In addition to this, the matching fund contribution minimum of 50% will be required for all projects. These changes are part of our annual update to the sector guide in response to input and feedback received throughout the year from stakeholders, applicants, and staff. In addition to these changes, we've made small updates to clarify and improve existing policy, for example, rewording sections and providing additional information when necessary. These changes are in the spirit of continually improving our program. So I'll now go into an overview of the capital project grant program. So community gaming grants gets $140 million annually from commercial gaming revenue, and approximately $135 million of this goes to our general community gaming grant program to help profits directly deliver ongoing programming, and approximately $5 million from that goes to the capital project grant program to help not-for-profits with capital projects or acquisitions. 2022 will be our 6th year of the capital project program. The objective of the program is to enable not-for-profit organizations to complete capital projects that provide significant benefit to communities. Capital project programs specifically for capital projects with a total cost between $20,000 to $1,250,000. We are strict on this. The reason is that we are looking for projects within the scope of a not-for-profit organization, not mega multi-year projects. PACs are eligible to apply, that's Parent Advisory Councils. The grant is open to all of the same 6 sectors as well as the 6 sectors in the main community gaming grant program. Organizational eligibility is very similar to the regular community gaming grant program as well. Between 20% and 50% of the total cost of a project may be funded. The percent depends on the cost of the project and the total grant amount. We provide grants up to a maximum of $250K. Matching funds from the applicant organization are required, and these must be on hand at the time of application. A bona fide commitment is acceptable. The funding in hand is a stronger case for your application. Successful applicants will get what they've applied for, assuming these other requirements are met. The assessment process is competitive. Applicants are encouraged to put forward their strongest application possible. It's competitive and it's highly oversubscribed, so do put forward your best application possible. The intake period for 2022 will be June 4th to August 4th. Organizations can only submit 1 application per year for 1 project only, not phases of project or cascading projects. There should only be 1 lead in the application project. Organizations can get the support of other organizations, but one organization has to assume the responsibility for it, and this must be clear in the application. And they will also assume responsibility for all requirements and conditions associated with receiving the grant. Organizations can still apply for the regular community gaming grant funding. These programs are considered separate. Like the regular guidelines, the capital project program has its own sector guide updated each year, and the 2022 guidelines have been published on our website. Applicants must make the strongest case possible in each section of the application, being mindful that all other applicants are also making their strongest case, as it is a competitive application process. Provide complete information and documentation. Incomplete, inaccurate, or missing documentation will significantly weaken the application, and community gaming grants will not contact applicants for further clarification or missing information or documentation, again, as it is competitive. Late applications will not be accepted. Grants will not be awarded until all applications are received and reviewed. The Capital Project Sector Guide is our main policy document for the program. The 2022 guidelines will have all new changes reflected for the year, as well as all information on our program. We strongly encourage you to read through these in advance of preparing and submitting your application. Now we'll talk about organization eligibility. So you must be a not-for-profit organization. You must operate primarily for community benefit. You must deliver or support programs within the community gaming grant's 6 sectors: arts and culture, sport, environment, public safety, human and social services, and parent advisory council and district parent advisory councils. And this is where it's slightly different than our community gaming grant requirements for organizations. The organizations through capital projects do not need to deliver a program directly to apply for a capital project grant. But it's helpful when you talk about your community benefit to talk about programs that might be supported through the work of your capital project. Organizations must have an open membership. They must have a volunteer board and voting membership, more than double the number of voting members to board members. They must be democratically chosen board members, and 2/3 of these must reside in BC. Board members must also not receive remuneration for their board role. Ineligible organizations include for-profit organizations, member-funded societies, political parties, political action groups or lobby groups, federal, provincial, regional, municipal, First Nation, or other local governments, educational institution or schools, provincially or municipally operated facilities such as libraries, museums, or recreation centers, and religious institutions. Grant also requires the following documents to assess organization eligibility. This includes the Constitution and bylaws, if you haven't provided one within the last 2 years during your regular community gaming grant application, board of directors list, and minutes from the most recent annual general meeting. So I'll now speak about project eligibility. So the project eligibility criteria for this program, as mentioned, only one grant application per applicant and only one project per grant. So applicants can apply for only one of these project categories. An organization could apply for a suite of building restoration activities, but can apply for a fleet of vehicles. Organizations need to pick one project they need to complete. We want to see successful completion of a total project, not half completion of a few. So project categories are facilities, construction of new facilities, renovation or maintenance of existing facilities, and you can see some examples on the screen. Community infrastructure, such as development of public amenities that improve BC residents' quality of life. And acquisitions, the purchase of fixed capital assets for long-term ownership and use by the applicant organization. So we will not fund research or development projects. This program funds hard assets. Each project category has its own eligibility criteria, similar to community gaming grant programs. And generally speaking, these include things like the project is for community benefit and accessible to the public upon completion. The organization has the right to build and modify the land, proof of ownership, lease, permission, etc. So further to the project categories and their own eligibility criteria, facilities and community infrastructure project criteria includes, for both, they must be undertaken by an eligible organization for community benefit. It must be accessible to the public upon completion. It must be located on one of the following: land owned by an eligible organization, land leased to an eligible organization on a long-term basis, which is 10 years, or public land, beyond public land. Some facilities cannot be completely open to the public, particularly if they're meant to serve certain segments of the population, for example, daycares or recovery houses. What we mean is that it's reasonably open to anyone who would have an interest in utilizing the completed project. It is not just for closed membership of people. For acquisitions, we have slightly different criteria due to the nature of this project type. The acquisition must be necessary for the delivery of a program or service. The acquisition is purchased by an eligible organization, primarily for community benefit. The project is for the purchase of privately owned fixed capital assets for long-term use, and the capital asset must belong to the eligible organization. So I'll now speak about financial eligibility. Organizations must have a separate gaming account and void gaming account check attached to the application. Use any restricted funds designated for the project, if relevant, in full toward matching fund requirements. Have matching funds to complete the project. As mentioned earlier, the applicant organization must have the matching funds required. This means the matching funds contribution must equal or exceed the level of capital project funding requested. And past recipients of community gaming grants must be up to date with their requirements for us and reporting needs, etc., and in good standing with their gaming account summary reports. We look at organizations' financial information in order to determine its financial capacity to proceed with the project. This information is the same as what is required for our main community gaming grant program. We require a revenue and expense statement from the previous fiscal year, the most recently completed, a balance sheet for the previous fiscal year, an organization budget for the current fiscal year, and accompanying notes to the financial statements for the previous fiscal year. I'll now talk about assessment and scoring. So the assessment process, applicants must meet all eligibility criteria to have their project assessed: organization eligibility, project eligibility, and financial eligibility. Projects are then scored against the assessment criteria. Once the ranking process has been completed, additional considerations may be applied. For example, sector distribution, regional distribution, indigenous projects. The Capital Project Grant Program is designed to support community identified needs and priorities. Its focus is on people, their needs, their development, and their involvement with the community. So here I'm going to get into the competitive scoring process and the different categories. So the community benefit section of the application requires details about the numbers of people that are likely to benefit and how they will benefit from the project and any associated programming. Include evidence of community support for your project and describe the needs or gaps the project will address. Please include information such as the following as evidence of community support for your project and describe the needs or gaps the project will address in your community. Discuss what the broader problem or need is in the community that this project and any associated programming will address. Example, the aging facility is unsafe and no service of its type is available with a 45-minute drive, or there is a current gap in service that the proposed equipment purchase would enable. Describe the number and population of people who will directly benefit from the project and any associated programming in a year. For example, over 150 newcomers and refugees in the Cowichan Valley will benefit, or 50 Indigenous youth ages 13 to 17 will benefit in 1 year, or all community members interested in salmon restoration will benefit, or 100 socially isolated adults over the age of 65 in the Vanderhoof area will benefit. Those are examples of how you can describe the number and the population of people who will benefit. If applicable, include details, numbers, or statistics to substantiate the community benefit. For example, share findings from a recent community consultation study. Provide waitlist numbers demonstrating that existing facility has more users than it can accommodate. Where possible, quantify the impact this project would have on the community if completed. For example, the approximate number of individual visits to facilities annually, kilometers of trails maintained, etc. Excuse me, I'm just going to take a sip of water. In the inclusiveness and accessibility section, applicants are scored on how many people will benefit and in ensuring it's open and inclusive to all. We are looking to see how the project is open and accessible to all people in the community, including people of all ages, abilities, sexual orientations, gender identities, ethnicities, cultural backgrounds, religions, languages, underrepresented communities, and social economic conditions. For project feasibility category, which is 25% of the total score, we want to see that there's a sound plan in place to ensure the project starts after funding is provided and it'll be completed on time. Information we are looking for in this section covers the project timeline, that risks are considered and a risk management plan is in place, appropriate approvals and permits have already been obtained, and that the ongoing operation of the project is viable. For successful applicants, funding must be spent within 36 months of receipt. Project timeline should show how the project will be completed within that timeline. The project must start within 12 months of receiving funding also. Financial considerations make up a big bulk of the competitive scoring process at 45%. Not only do we want to see a viable plan for the execution of the project, we want to see solid numbers on the financial aspect of the project. Here we would assess the total project cost and budget, how much grant funds are requested to complete the project, how the grant funds will be used toward eligible expenses, and that the matching funds are in place. Environmental efficiency accounts for 5% of the scoring. This section covers how the project includes climate action or energy efficient features that will reduce the organization's greenhouse gas emissions, lower the organization's long-term operational expenses, such as heating, cooling costs, etc., and or improve the use of the organization's human and or technological resources, for example, reduce resource consumption. This may not be applicable to all projects, and applicants can note when this is not applicable and why. Now I'm going to talk about spending the grants, the fun part. So grant funds must be used to cover costs directly related to and necessary for the successful implementation of an approved project. Eligible expenses include project-related fees paid to professional technical personnel, consultants and contractors, project material such as lumber, kitchen equipment, transportation or shipping costs for acquisitions, licenses, permits, and insurance required for the project, any other direct and necessary costs incurred in the implementation of the project. Organizations must have a separate account for receiving, holding, and dispersing the gaming funds. Grant funds must be spent within 36 months of receipt, and projects must start within 12 months to receive the grant, of receiving the grant. All eligible expenses must be paid directly from the gaming account. Funds may be transferred from the gaming to the general or operating account to reimburse eligible program expenses, though. Payment can be made through check or board-approved electronic transfer. Checks or transfers must be signed or authorized by at least 2 unrelated signing officials, at least one of whom must be an officer of the organization. We recommend that the treasurer not be granted signing authority in order to ensure appropriate segregation of duties. This is a best practice to prevent fraud or inappropriate spending of funds. All organizations that receive community gaming grants or have previously received a grant and still have money in their gaming account must submit a gaming account summary report, which I'll call a GASR. Organizations must also complete the capital projects grant supplement. The GASR and the capital project supplement together report on all spending from the gaming account during the fiscal year. GASR details include a gaming account balance at the beginning of the fiscal year, grants received, funds dispersed, and the balance at the end of the fiscal year. The GASR also requires a description of how the community benefited from the project supported by the Community Gaming Grant. GASRs must be submitted within 90 days of the organization's fiscal year end. The Capital Project Grant Supplement is an attachment to the report that focuses on the expenditures related to your capital project grant. Capital Project Supplement must include a list of all project-related disbursements and or disbursements from the gaming account, and must include details about each disbursement/reimbursed expense. Capital project expenses must be consistent, comparable to those outlined in the approved grant application. Organizations must submit all recent GASRs in order to receive another community gaming grant or capital project grant. The GASR helps to ensure that grant funding is only used on eligible expenses. There are blank GASRs or capital project supplements and example GASR documents available on our website. Project completion report. Once a capital project is completed, the grant recipient must notify the branch in writing at communitygaminggrants@gov.bc.ca. A short post-completion report to include a description of the completed project and how it is benefiting the community, a breakdown of total project expenses, and photos. The branch may request that these materials be used to publicize the outcomes of the capital project grant sector. Applying for the grant. So the intake period opened June 4th and it closes August 4th, and notifications will be late fall of 2022. So you can apply online on our website. Paper applications are not accepted. Documents must be attached to the application, no mail or email. New applicants must contact the branch and provide the BC Society number, operating start year and fiscal year end date. Before applying, we recommend you review the sector guide and or other resources on our website for valuable tips, such as our frequently asked questions, our application tutorials, and sample financial statements. So a little bit more for first-time applicants. Those who have never applied for a community gaming grant or a capital project grant are required to call into the Community Gaming Grants branch before starting their application. To be able to submit an application by August 4th deadline, new applicants must make contact with the branch before 4 p.m. on Wednesday, August 3rd at the latest. Before phoning, have the following information on hand: the organization name, BC Society number, organization's operating start date, and organization fiscal year end date. Tips and advice for applying. Start with reading the most recent program guidelines. Review the pre-application checklist within the sector guide. Review resources on our website, such as the FAQs, financial statements, tutorials, etc. Save all required documentation as a Word doc or a PDF for ease of uploading. Call or email if you have questions. Somebody's available on our duty line, which we'll show in a slide coming up, every workday during work hours. And ensure your gaming account summary reports are submitted. Here are some resources to help. Key resources include the Community Gaming Grants website, as well as our email addresses, communitygaminggrants@gov.bc.ca, or you can call, again, the duty line at 250-356-1081, or you can reach our community outreach manager, myself, at cggoutreach@gov.bc.ca. And obviously, there's the BC Association of Charitable Gaming. So again, they're a provincial non-for-profit organization that liaises between community groups and the Community Gaming Grant branch. And they're there to provide support services to charities and not-for-profit organizations for the purpose of applying for our grants and any other nonprofit needs. And I highly recommend you take advantage of this great resource. There are also charitable gaming associations, regional charitable gaming associations. There are also nonprofit organizations that support their local charities and community groups with their applications for community gaming grants. And I know the PDF is available, so I won't pause on this slide too long because you can check out the PDF for any details you miss. So I'd like to thank Kalina and the BCACG for hosting this webinar and inviting us to speak. And I'd also like to thank my colleague, one of our policy analysts, Jillian Widener, for her help with the Q&A. And now I would say we can open it for questions.